You know, sometimes the most relevant stories aren't the ones happening right now, but the ones we can find in the past. Today, we're going to crack open a government report from the year 2000. And I know, that sounds dry, but it's not just old data. It's a surprisingly timeless look at a really fundamental question. How do we hold our most critical systems accountable?
And really, this entire report boils down to this one very heavy question. When a child is in state care, they're supposed to be safe. But what happens when the very system designed to help them ends up causing them harm? Who steps in then?
Well, in Washington state since 1996, part of the answer has been this really unique and independent office. Its whole purpose is to be a watchdog, to be a voice for the people who feel like the system just isn't listening to them.
The official name for this kind of role is an ombudsman. And what makes an ombudsman so different really comes down to three things: independence, impartiality, and confidentiality. They're set up to be totally separate from the agencies they investigate, which means they can be objective fact-finders, not just another cog in the bureaucratic machine. And this quote from a community leader in the report, wow, it just brilliantly spells out the stakes here. It is a disturbing reality, but it's exactly why an independent watchdog is so absolutely essential. Somebody has to hold the system accountable. So let's dive into what the report actually found. And I'll tell you, it doesn't pull any punches. It uses hard data and case reviews to pinpoint exactly where the child welfare system was falling short. And the picture it paints, well, it's pretty telling.
First off, who was raising the alarm? Well, get this. A staggering 82% of all complaints came directly from parents, grandparents, and other relatives. These aren't strangers. They're the people closest to the children, and they're seeing the problems with their own eyes.
And what were they most worried about? The answer is, honestly, it's chilling. For the first time ever, the number one issue, with 121 separate complaints, was child safety itself. This wasn't about missing paperwork or visitation schedules. This was about a fundamental fear that kids were not being kept safe from harm. And the report doesn't just leave this as a statistic. It grounds all this data in a heartbreaking reality. The death of Zynian Nobles, a 3-year-old girl who died while under state supervision, became a tragic case study that forced everyone to confront the life-or-death consequences of a system failing. So when the Ombudsman's office reviewed her case, they found it wasn't just one person's mistake. It was a cascade of systemic issues. There was potential caseworker bias, where an initial assumption just wasn't challenged by new information. The system's own checks and balances completely failed, and the very people required by law to report suspected abuse, they didn't. It's like multiple layers of the safety net just collapsed.
But look, an investigation is only useful if it actually leads to change, right? So the Ombudsman didn't just point out problems, it proposed concrete solutions. It took these hard lessons and turned them into urgent recommendations for making the whole system better.
And this is where accountability turns into action. The report said, hey, let's change the legal definition of neglect so it includes ongoing patterns of harm, not just one big crisis. It called for mandatory training for professionals who are legally required to report abuse. And so crucially, it pushed to make sure that foster kids and their parents even knew the Ombudsman's office existed as a place they could turn to for help.
And then, the report does something kind of remarkable. It pivots. With this one sentence, it totally shifts gears, moving away from just analyzing failure to asking this radical new question. What if, instead of only fixing what's broken, we try to understand and replicate what's actually working? And that idea led to what is, for me, the most powerful section of the entire report. They launched something called the Foster Youth Appreciative Interview Project. The idea was simple, but so profound. If you want to learn about success, you have to talk to the people who are actually experiencing it. You have to listen to the kids. So that's what they did. They sat down with 32 young people from ages 11 to 17, and instead of asking what went wrong, they asked what went right. They asked them to tell stories about the really good times, the moments they felt happy and cared for and truly accepted.
And the answers they got, wow, they were just so moving and incredibly insightful. And they weren't about big government programs or policies. Nope, they were all about the small human moments that made all the difference in the world. And 3 really powerful themes emerged. The first, and maybe the most prominent theme, was this deep, powerful desire to just feel normal. Not to be labeled, not to be treated as different, but to simply be a kid, just part of a family.
I mean, this quote right here, it says it all, doesn't it? The biggest success from this kid's point of view, was when that foster kid label completely disappeared and they were finally free to just be themselves. That's what belonging feels like.
And think about how that feeling gets created. It's through simple, everyday family rituals. Being included in a holiday meal. Being treated like any other cousin in the family. These small acts of inclusion were absolutely profound. Okay, the second big theme was all about feeling genuinely cared about. And this wasn't about getting stuff, it was about the gestures that showed real compassion and real attention.
I mean, what is more powerful than that? In a moment of just unimaginable grief, what mattered most was a simple, profound act of human comfort. No policy, no rule book can mandate that. That's just genuine care.
And what's amazing is that feeling of being cared for could come from anywhere. This story shows a social worker who went beyond the checklist, who anticipated a need, and who made a young person feel seen and valued. Such a small act, but it had a huge impact.
All right, the third and final theme that came through loud and clear was about agency. You know, in a system where kids so often feel powerless, just having their opinions heard and respected was a total game changer. It was about being seen as a person with a voice, not just as a name in a case file. And this plea from a young person just sums it all up so perfectly. The best advice for how adults can make a difference was so incredibly simple and direct. Just listen. So that brings us back to today. This report is over 2 decades old, but its lessons feel more urgent than ever. It's this powerful reminder that accountability isn't just about finding fault, it's about listening, it's about learning, and it's about having the courage to ask what's working. And it leaves us with a question that I think we all need to consider. Are we really listening?